the interest rate differential to extremely low levels, like 20 basis points. And that was the basis of the real estate bubble in Spain, which has now exploded. So this is, and now the banks are loaded with those bonds, and of course they haven't marked it to market, and if they did, they would be insolvent, and that's why, of course, once the differential started to reappear and started to endanger the banks had to stop buying them, and therefore the differentials expanded. Now, it's sort of, you had a real crisis, which is reached a climax point. The authorities got their act together and set up a seemingly big rescue package, and I suppose that will gradually work their way out of the crisis. But the fact is that the European banks are way undercapitalized. The stress tests that are currently conducted are on the basis of the existing rules, which allow them to be undercapitalized. But everybody knows, this is called Basel II, but everybody knows that that has to be changed, and there have to be a Basel III. So you'll have some banks will now need to raise additional capital, but all the banks need to deleverage. And that is what is driving Europe into a deflationary cycle.
Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you, as the head of the Congressional Oversight Panel, you have put out, your group has put out 15 reports?
22.
22 reports.
Yeah,
and they're pretty
statutorily required, every single one of them.
They're pretty fun to read in a ghoulish kind of way, I must say. And they've pretty much covered every aspect of the financial crisis, have they not? So my loaded question is, of all the reports you've put out, which is the one that you find the most shocking? What is the aspect? Was it the cravenness of the rating agencies, the connection, the subprime activities? There's a connectedness between that runs all the way from individuals buying homes to credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations and everybody in between who was involved in this kind of mass insanity. And I was just sort of wondering, as you reflect, what really hits you over the head?
You know, that's actually a very hard question, because every one of the reports, I really mean this, out of 22 reports, every one of them, there would just be points as we would dig through the data and interview people that I would just genuinely lean back and say, oh my God, I don't believe this. And so in that sense, this is like asking, how many bad dates did you have when you were a teenager?
I'll have to remember that.
You just, how do we make the comparisons here? But I will mention a few highlights,
okay,
if I can, okay? If we had somebody who put together the montage and play some music in the background, you'd sort of flash. Let me tell you the ones that just pop into my mind almost immediately. Actually, the first two reports just knock my socks off to this day. Go back and read them sometime. They're all at cop.senate.gov, if anybody wants to look these things up. The very first report we wrote within 15 days of having been constituted as a panel. And the report just basically says, remember, this is November of 2008, and it says to Secretary Paulson, because that's who we're supposed to be overseeing, here's some really basic questions about what it is you're out there doing with $700 billion of the American taxpayers' money. And so we put these questions out. They're pretty straightforward. There are 10 of them. and they explain why each one of them is a question, and really just it's just to try to put to it what's going on at this point. We got back on New Year's Eve. We have to do reports every 30 days, and this first report had come out on December 8th. So we're going to have to do our next report on January 8th, 9th, something like that. We got back on New Year's Eve, because I remember this. We'd gone to see family, and I'm sitting there with my laptop open, and all of a sudden there is about 6:15 on New Year's Eve, and there is the response from Treasury to these questions that we've asked basically on behalf of the American people. And the response is a cut and paste from some press releases. It really was. It was just a moment when you say, so that's the deal. You think that's what this is about? You know, that you're off, and that's how important the notion of oversight is, and the notion that some of the rest of us would like to be in on a conversation about just the basic pieces about how you're spending this money and why and what your rationalization is for some parts is, and just some, and that was the answer. So that was a highlight moment. Another highlight moment has been a repeating moment, and that's been the HAMP program. If you had interviewed me 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and said, we have a crystal ball here, let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to reach a point in America where 1.5 million homeowners are going to lose their homes to foreclosure. They're just going to be knocked out of their homes. And think about this. If there are 1.5 million losing them to foreclosure, how many more are doing them in short sales and jingle mail and elbowed out in other ways that never show up in the actual statistics? That's going to happen not 1 year, but it's going to happen in 8, it's going to happen in 9, it's going to happen in 10, and at least as best our projections go, it's going to happen again in 11, may happen again in 12. If that's what you saw, tell me, Elizabeth, what do you think will be the response of the United States government? 2 different administrations, what will be their response? And I would have said to you, they will never let that happen. It's pitchforks and torches. They'll be in there, they'll find a way, they'll get ahead of this, because as soon as you can see those numbers and see what's unfolding, we'll find ways to deal with it. We'll find ways to bring these mortgages back, right? Countries restructure their debt, businesses restructure their debt. We will find a way to do this, because it makes no sense to knock all these people out of homes, to knock out value, not just for those people, but for all of their neighbors, right? We could go through the whole thing, just a big macroeconomic analysis. Even if you don't have a heart and you have a thumping liver, you'd still worry about the economic impact of doing this, just staggering. And boy, would I have been wrong. Remember the first 2 programs during Bush, which was, let's ask the mortgage companies if they would like to help these people out. And then along came the next Treasury, and it said, okay, $50 billion set aside to make something happen. And we have now written 3 reports or 4 reports, I have to count. We write reports on this every 6 months. We reviewed this report when it first came out in this program, and we said, not big enough, not fast enough, and not permanent solutions. You know, something that gets this crisis behind us, gets us ahead of it and stops it, and says this market, real estate market, does not have to keep chasing itself down with foreclosures and failure and so on. And we just keep writing that report again.
And why do you think it's so hard to mitigate foreclosures? Is it because nobody has the nerve to reduce principal? Is it because no one will do something radical, like, say, turn your keys over and your deed, and you can then rent for 5 years until you get yourself back on your feet if you do that? Is it just because everyone's trying to do it on the margins?
It's a lot of answers that all tend to drive in the same way. You put your finger on 2 of them. George has put his finger on one of them, and that is when you